Hello, my name is April Adrianson, and I am one of the 2 full-time tag teachers at State Bridge Crossing Elementary School in Fulton County in Georgia. The purpose of this screencast is to explain and help you interpret your child's tag eligibility report. It would be helpful to have your child's eligibility report in front of you as you view this screencast. First, your child was assessed in 4 different areas for the gifted testing. They were mental ability, achievement, creativity, and motivation. We give the Cognitive Ability Test, also known as the COGAT, for the mental ability assessment. It is given over the course of 3 days and involves 3 subtests: verbal, quantitative, and nonverbal. For kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grade, all test questions are read aloud to the students. For 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades, there are 3 10-minute tests given for each subtest. Looking on the eligibility report at this time, you'll see right here the beginning date the assessment was given. If there is more than 1 row of scores, as in just like this example, this indicates the child has been tested more than 1 time. Next to the date, right here, you will see the verbal scaled score. It's also known as verbal SS. This score does not mean much to you, but it does help us norm the score. For your purposes, though, I would just ignore it. Next to the verbal SS, you'll see the verbal NPR. This is the verbal subtest national percentile rank. A percentile is different than a percentage. A percentage is the number of questions out of a whole assessment that a student gets correct. For example, if there are 50 questions on a test and a child misses 2 questions, their percentage for that test would be 96%, because the questions, hypothetically speaking, could be worth 2 points each. For a nationally normed test, we score it in terms of percentiles. This means that of all students in the nation that took the same test at the same age, and we actually compute it down to how many days old they are, they scored at or better than that percentile of them. For example, for a student that scores a 60th percentile, this can be read that they scored at or better than 60% of the other students in the country at their same age that took this same test. Please note that a 50th percentile is considered average. If their percentile is above 50, that means they scored above the average student in the country that also took this same test. Looking again at the eligibility report, next to the verbal NPR, you'll see the quantitative SS, or scaled score, and corresponding NPR as well. Next to that, you'll see the nonverbal scaled score and the nonverbal national percentile rank. Again, please ignore the scaled scores. On the eligibility reports, on some of them, you will see the composite scores. This looks like the verbal quantitative SS scaled score, the verbal quantitative national percentile rank, the verbal nonverbal scaled score, the verbal nonverbal percentile rank, the quantitative nonverbal scaled score, the quantitative nonverbal national percentile rank, and then finally you'll see a composite scaled score and a composite national percentile rank. So when a student has 2 scores in the 90th percentiles, we can compute partial and or full composites. Far over to the right, you'll see a column that says meet MA criteria. There will be an Y or an N for yes, the student meets the criteria for the mental ability assessment, or no, they do not. To have a qualifying mental ability score, one must score at least a 96th percentile or higher in one of those 3 areas: the verbal, the quantitative, or the nonverbal subtest. They could also have a 96th percentile in one of the 3 partial composites or the full composite. The second area that is assessed is achievement. For kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grades, we give the Stanford Reading or the Math Achievement Test per testing session. All questions are read aloud for students in these grades. They must score a 90th percentile or higher to meet the achievement assessment criteria. For 3rd and 5th grades, we use the ITBS, which was in the past, or the Iowa, which this is the first year the Iowa has been given, those achievement test scores, and that test has historically been given in October. For fourth grade, we use their scores from when they took the assessment in the third grade. They must score a 90th percentile or higher on the total reading, total math, or the total battery parts of the test. And looking at your eligibility report for the achievement assessment, you'll see the name of the achievement test given, then the test date, along with their total reading, total math, or complete composite, which is also sometimes known as the total battery scores. The last column indicates if the student met the achievement criteria with a Y or an N, just like the mental ability area. The third area assessed is creativity. We give the Torrance Test of Creative Thinking, also called the TTCT, to assess creativity. This test is given in one testing session and has 3 separate 10-minute activities. Looking at the eligibility report, you'll see the date the test was administered, along with a creativity index and PR. The student must score a 90th percentile or higher to meet the creativity criteria, which again is denoted in the last column. For some students that do not qualify the first time they are tested for the TAG program, their name comes up again in another screening. If they had scored a 60th percentile or higher on the TTCT, there is another creativity assessment that can be given, which is called a product. The product is given by the homeroom teacher, who is trained by the TAG teacher on how to administer it. You'll see this score in the average column if your child was given this assessment. The last area that is assessed is motivation. 2 teachers that have known the student for more than 30 school days are asked to fill out the Gifted Rating Scale, also known as the GRS. There are 12 indicators that the teachers assess that relate to what they observe in their classroom in regards to motivation. The highest score from the 2 teachers is what is recorded. Looking at the eligibility report, you'll see the date that the rating scale was filled out, and then right there is the score. To meet the motivation criteria, the student must have a 90th percentile or higher. Now, all scores are valid for 2 years. Students cannot take the same tests, but every 2 years. Depending, however, on their scores in certain areas, there are alternative tests that can be given. This is done on a case-by-case basis as laid out in the TAG Procedures Manual. The eligibility report shown right here that you see on your screen is of a student that has been tested multiple times, as you can see. Looking at the area of mental ability, they scored a 65th percentile on verbal, 97th percentile quantitative, and a 70th percentile on the nonverbal section. This child has met the criteria for mental ability because of their 97th percentile score here on the quantitative section. For achievement, they needed to have a 90th percentile in one of these 3 areas. This child did not meet the criteria for achievement at this time. For creativity, they also had to have a 90th percentile to meet the creativity criteria. At this time, the child does not meet the criteria for creativity. And lastly, for motivation, they needed to score a 90th percentile or higher for this area, and this child did in fact score a 96th percentile, so they have met the criteria for motivation. To become eligible for the TAG program, they must meet the criteria for 3 out of the 4 areas assessed. This child at this time is not eligible because they only met the criteria for 2 of the 4 areas. Now going down to the second example of an eligibility report. This child did not meet the criteria for the mental ability assessment because they needed at least a 96th percentile in one of these 3 areas. So they did not meet it at this time. Going down to achievement, they needed a 90th percentile in either total reading, total math, or the complete composite. So they did not meet the criteria for this category either. Going down to creativity, they needed at least a 90th percentile on this assessment, and they did in fact meet that criteria. And again, for motivation, they needed at least a 90th percentile to meet the criteria for motivation, and they did meet this. However, they again only met 2 of the 4 areas, and thus is not eligible for tag at this time. Looking at the last and final example of an eligibility report. This is of a child that scored a 99th percentile in verbal, 99th percentile in quantitative, and a 96th percentile in nonverbal. They clearly have met the criteria for mental ability. And remember, you only have to have a 96th percentile in one of those 3 areas. For the second, for achievement, they only needed a 90th percentile, and they scored a 93 or 93rd percentile, so they met the criteria for achievement as well. For creativity, they scored a 90th percentile. They met that criteria. And for motivation, they scored a 97th percentile, so they met the criteria for this category as well. So this child is eligible for tag at this time because they met at least 3 of the 4 areas, whereas in fact this child met 4 of the 4 areas. I thank you very much for taking the time to view this entire screencast. I hope this helps you interpret your own child's eligibility report. If you have any further questions, please do not hesitate in emailing me. Thank you so much.